All right, welcome to Political Talk on another PolitiPod Live. Tonight we'll cover This Week in Death, tariffs, election central, well oil beef hooked, and an Epstein update. I'm Hannah Soldner.
And I'm Matt Nisanoff. We will start with here's a little surprise for you. We're going to start with the Epstein count up, which is something we've always done at the end of the show, but we're giving it a shot just to see what happens if we do it at the top. And if you've been following this at all, which hopefully you have been every step of the way, this is the number of days that the unredacted Epstein list has not been released by the Trump administration. Today we're at day 4,061. And although it was promised, he promised he'd have it released on the first day of his administration. Then it became he'd do it in the first week. And then it became that the file was on the Attorney General's desk. That's what she claimed. Shortly thereafter, that the files never existed at all, she said. They just don't exist. And then it became a legal requirement to release the documents as Congress got into the game, and a combination of both Democrats and Republicans called for release of the files, all of them, by a certain date. And that has not happened. That's part of this, part of what the count up is all about. And although they did call for its release and it was not released, several of the Congress members were allowed to see the unredacted version. And the Republicans who saw it came out, everyone who saw it came out so extremely upset that even hardcore MAGA people started turning on Trump after that, demanding the release. And he went after those people in their elections and has defeated a number of them, but not all of them. And we're still waiting for the legal compliance to releasing the documents, which they've not done. And anything on this, Hannah, before we move on?
We're going to have a more Epstein update later in the show, but I think it's important to have this reminder. And, as Matt sort of alluded to, it's both a mix of that, we want to bring it up weekly and make sure we notice it because we want to make sure it stays in the conversation. But also it's worth noting that there have been people calling for these, for the release, consistently. And basically whenever anybody learns more, then their calls for it increase. And so, I think we think it's something that we need to continue to push for. And and there's no reason not to do it. And they're going to keep trying to distract, and we just got to keep needling them.
Exactly. You got to talk about it because they will do anything and everything, including wars, to get you to not think about it. And so that's, as Hannah says, that's why we're doing it. For now, we're going to move on to our next issue. This is This Week in Death. And we're going to start off. There's a number of issues, one of which was, of course, there was a Pride parade in Berlin. And this was, I believe, last weekend. And a man drove his car into the parade and then started stabbing people and actually killed at least one parade goer and injured another 29. Any other thing on this story?
We're going to get a little bit into some of this later. Obviously, it's horrifying and the violence is concerning. It's concerning that it's about, a group that's been facing some sort of international pushback for a long time, but definitely some of the sort of queer communities, all of them always, but some of them, have been increased. But also, I want to make this note. It's sort of a grim note, but it's good to note that this person, obviously it's horrible that he was able to kill one person, injure 29, and I don't know how bad these injuries are. They could be truly life altering. But it is, if there's any silver lining, it's that a shooting would probably have more deaths, um, but it's still awful, and we need to keep we can't become desensitized to it.
Fair enough. And we are coming out against murder. Just want to make
Yes.
certain that's absolutely clear. That's something we're definitely against. And another story in this segment is the Washington shooting. Washington State had a shooting where there were the festival at each other have been killed in the shootout.
Hi, sorry, I'm seem to be having some video delays. So yes, everything that you mentioned. I don't, uh, sure, right. It's there's something about a 15-year-old being involved that's intensely tragic. It's always tragic, but it's just a kid who had no idea, probably what they're getting themselves into and things like that. I don't mean to belittle, I first became aware the first modern big shooting happened in Columbine when I was 13. Um, and obviously it was conducted by other teenagers, and so not that children cannot and are not forced to hold the weight of this, but it's sad that there can be so much pressure at that young of an age to engage in violence.
True, and one of those three shooters was killed, and the 15-year-old you mentioned is, I guess, still on the loose. They weren't able to capture him, so they're still looking. If you're out in that area and know what's going on out there. Another incident was up in Toronto. Our friends in Canada. There was a shooting near the U.S. consulate. I don't know how relevant that is specifically, but the news stories wanted to mention that a lot. It's the second time in 4 months there's been shootings in the area. The suspects from the March shooting, the previous shooting, once again 18-year-old, in this case 18-year-old Sheldon Tracy Stewart and 19-year-old Zara Jabi. And so once again, teenagers involved with this, which is, as you point out, just makes it exponentially tragic. This incident the other day had a video of a white sedan in the area that fled as soon as the shots were taken, and there were bullet shells that remained to show that this was actually something that happened. The Mounties say that this is a matter of national security. So, how the teenagers fit into national security level issues, it'll be interesting to see what actually comes of that and to see what facts come out.
Yeah.
We are moving along at a brisk pace, and we are going to bring on our next issue, which is maybe a familiar one to some, at least the title there. It's the economy, stupid. And in this case, the thing that happened just today was the Fed decided that they would hold interest rates at the current level. Previous to the meeting, there were some discussions about, well, first of all, Trump was desperate and trying to get them to lower the interest rate, using any kind of pressure he can on the members to do what he wanted to lower the interest rate so he can finally claim that he's doing something to help the economy. And that did not happen. Is a 3-3 vote. Three members wanted to hold the rate steady, and three wanted to raise the interest rate, actually. So it almost went in the opposite direction, but the final decision was to simply hold them in place. What's going on? What else is going on, Hannah?
There's been a antagonistic relationship between Trump and the Fed for a long time. I think he's trying to swap out people who are more friendly to him, but by nature of it being independent, they're still able to do this. And there's this weird place that our economy is in right now, where like the for the people who have money, the haves, it's booming, and for the people who don't, it's going terribly. Um, and so I think that obviously a raising of it is always a little difficult on all pocketbooks, but I do feel like making the boom bigger is probably just going to hide more of the bust side of it. So I'm glad that they're at least holding.
There you go. Another issue is tariffs, of course, always at the forefront if it's involved with the current administration. And now, due to the Constitution, it says the president can only do certain things for certain time periods, and especially things that Congress is supposed to take care of. And tariffs is one of those things where Trump's trying to pull a fast one. But for some reason, he's also paying attention to the dates because all of a sudden he pulled away from some of his other tariff demands, and just in time to be under that deadline. But that means he started a new set, and this time there's 10% that's being charged after a year, and so it's interesting the timing that he would bring these in just at the time when he's has to, according to somebody else's rules, in this case the Constitution. Um, it looks like he's trying to claim that these tariffs are in response to countries that are using forced labor. So now he's terribly concerned about forced labor. I don't think he has been so much before this. He hasn't stated that as really a particular thing of interest to him as president, and most certainly not as a businessman, where he sends things constantly to China, hats and shirts, and I'm sure the labeling for the Trump steaks and the labels that were on the bottles for Trump vodka, and the boxes for the Trump steaks, and the whatever he had at the casino that he failed with. So I'm sure that he's consistently shown an interest in going to foreign markets for cheap labor. But now this week he's concerned about forced labor, and he's enacting tariffs to show how upset he really is. What do you know about tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to like hear you describe that process of like stopping them, because of restrictions in the law. Um, it's kind of similar to some of the stuff he's saying absurdly about like the war stuff, where he's like, oh, like we did this and then it's over and now we're back again and now it's over and now we're back again. But it's also similar to like, I don't know, like when you get a free trial of something, all you have to do is like insert your email, and he's just up there making 1,000 new emails, so he doesn't have to pay ever. Um, it's all like just lies, and yeah, it's basically just to fit the you know some weak letter of the law, but definitely not the intent of the law. Neither of which he cares about.
Exactly. There's also issue with Brazil. He's enacted some more tariffs on Brazil, and the Brazilian president, Lula da Silva, is very unhappy because it's his understanding that they had talked these issues out and were it would be handled differently. So when tariffs were enacted on Brazil again, this has caused another incident where it's looks like it's going to hurt our partnership with Brazil. Uh, Anything on our neighbors to the south?
Yeah, I mean, Brazil is uh, I don't know. They're a strong company. They're a country. They're coming up in the world. They're a big trade partner of us. They have a large population. They're very influential. Um, but Trump doesn't care about any of this soft power or anything. And maybe that's why De Silva did this as an op-ed in the Washington Post, um, to sort of combat the propaganda. Also, this is not specifically here. I actually should have said it in the last distinction. But when I was saying, that the average person is seeing a very poor economy, and why it's good that we're not, we're being cautious with interest rates. One of these things is tariffs, right? It's causing, a lot. This is actually going to be a little bit more in our next section, or our next part of this section. But like everything is becoming more expensive, um, partially because of tariffs, partially because of the war, partially because of some of these things like the AI infrastructure. If somebody builds a data center and you're nearby, they're competing with you for power, so your power rates are going to go up. And just a lot of these things Trump is engaged in are actively increasing the price of living as an American. And those, if you are a millionaire, it doesn't scale, right? Like, all these staples to exist hit hardest the people with the least amount of money. Um, so, who are the people who are also making the most in their investments as AI companies, or companies being paid the tariffs, or whatever. The people at the top are making money off the backs of the people at the bottom.
There you go. And Brazil will also. Oh, anything about small businesses?
Yeah, so same. Basically, that's why I said we talk about this more. So there's a place called the Liberty Justice Center. They represent a bunch of small businesses who are maybe too small to do, big things on their own, but if you can work with a lot of them. So they sued over the last tariffs, and they won a significant legal victory in the Supreme Court. And they're suing again on behalf of two companies, one here in New York called Burlap and Barrel, which just caught my eye because it was started by a person that one of my friends went to high school with. And it's like it's sort of a basic, like, it's like the quintessential like American, like the kind of business story you like, right? It was just started by some people who thought they could get better spices, and so they're trying to do a bunch of like real relationships with the spice growers and get higher quality spices, and a lot of like, uh, you know, I don't know about high end, probably a lot of high end. I don't really eat a lot of high end food, but like a lot of these places that are trying to like elevate a little bit are working a lot with Burlap and Barrel to like source spices and to get things that are good for everybody, good for the consumer, good for the grower, good for the importer, and etc. The quintessential thing, um, you should want to encourage is the kind of thing that's being hamstrung by this, because you know those people run a pretty thin margin. So
All right. We'll move on to our next issue, which is Election Central. And I mentioned, and you mentioned, and we've both talked about how we're going to come back to Brazil later in the show, and here we are. The Washington Post is reporting that there are some people being sent by the Trump administration to Brazil for the express purpose of trying to figure a way to rig the election to help the conservative candidate who is going to be running, who is, by the way, the son of Bolsonaro, the late leader, who had ties to Trump. And hey, look at that. He's helping his friends again. And the two people who were specifically sent to educate the local election officials as if they didn't know how to run an election um, are State Department Assistant Secretary Riley M. Barnes and Deputy Assistant Secretary Samuel Sampson. And they went down there to Brazil, and the Brazilians said, you know what, actually, we don't need your help. Thanks a lot. They were allowed to enter. The best their vote. These guys were in any way, shape, or form that it was known to be the case, that it was publicly knowledge, that is public knowledge that this is what these two are going down there for, is should be so wildly unacceptable that there should be some sort of reaction here in America as well. Is there anything about Brazil that Brazil and the election issue that's popped up for you?
Yeah, I mean, Brazil is sort of famous for corruption in its politics, but Bolsonaro is like especially bad. Um, and this voting in of his son is concerning. We're going to get more about the child of a former president in Peru a little bit later, but it's concerning. It's concerning that it's being done so openly. You know, like uh, in a certain sense, you know, it can sound a little bit old-fashioned to be like, "Oh, why is there no shame about this?" But one of the things that's worth noting is it the lack of shame also reflects desensitization. You know, like recently, JD Vance said that like if Watergate happened, you know, nowadays it would be like a 12-day story. Um, and like that should be concerning to us. You know, like Nixon should have gotten the punishment that he should have gotten. He should have gotten more punishment than he got. And so this idea of doing everything openly, um, you know, without any kind of uh, without any fear of reprisal is very concerning.
Yeah, and the fact that J.D. Vance is bringing up Watergate as somehow being, I don't know, is he trying to say that Watergate was some sort of great victory for the conservatives? I don't think it was. I think that that might be a rewriting of history.
Right.
But the fact that he's trying to pretend that there's some sort of maybe victory or victimization in it for the conservative movement is trying to rewrite history. And well, I mean, of course they're going to try to do that. It's such a disgrace that of course they're going to try. Um, but it is also interesting that this whole voter rigging the voting machines thing is being exported now. When Donald Trump just the other day gave a speech about how shocked he was to learn that he claims China was interfering in the election in 2020 and how they were doing it by interfering with the voting machine. So, for something that is a concern of his, he also seems to be using it as some sort of an educational um, uh, event for him as well, which is, of course, just weird. Also, in Election Central, we've got a judge. Now, the administration has sued 25 states to, in order for them to provide the federal government with their voting registration lists so that the federal government can run the election, which would be awfully helpful to Donald Trump and the conservatives specifically because it doesn't look like the election is going well for them and they need to, they need to get in there and do something, right? And they're certainly not going to do anything legal like run a campaign based on ideas. They're going to do it by trying to figure a way to work around the rules or rearrange the rules so that they can be done in their favor. Now, of the 25 states, one of them is Kentucky, which is a split state government. There's a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature. But Kentucky has some very solid conservative credit, right? Their senators are Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul. So it's not like they're light on the conservative side or the alt right, uh, fanatic right wing of the party. But Trump went after them as well and said that he wanted their voting lists. And for some reason, Kentucky didn't like that. And they reacted to it. Um, and recently, just the other day, a judge ruled against the administration demands for Kentucky's complete voter file. So we'll see what happens in the other 24 cases. But there's a little bit of good news for democracy and the Constitution, as it is a constitutional requirement that the local level handles elections. The White House also has whined about the SCOTUS not ruling on the mail in ballot issue, another way that they're trying to undermine the elections is to have mail in ballots invalidated if they're not in by election day, which there's a long and very sound history of giving mail in ballots that are postmarked the day of election, giving them 7 to 10 days to get into the Board of Elections so that they can have a fair chance. Overseas ballots, military ballots, all of these can be slightly delayed by going through the mail. And so there's this perfectly reasonable little couple of days to allow them to reach the Board of Elections. But this is the sort of thing that Trump calls rigging the election and is horribly upset about it. And he's trying to stop all mail-in ballots from being counted. And now, because he's lost on that in the courts, it's made its way up the appeals process, and he's now whining at the SCOTUS. He's now telling the Supreme Court that they need to take this case in August so that they can enact his rigging of the laws in August before the November election. So we'll see some more pressure put on them. I I don't think they're going to do it. The SCOTUS does not tend to reconvene in
Yeah.
August. It's a traditional month of recess for them, and so it would be very extraordinary for something to happen. But what do you know about either the judges ruling on the states or the issues coming before SCOTUS?
Yeah. So as for the states, well, obviously both of these are highly, highly concerning. You mentioned Rand Paul, who hasn't been in the news in a while, I feel like, in Kentucky. And I mean, like, while he is conservative and a lot of his views are, conservative aligned, he is also libertarian. So he's going to have a little bit of hesitancy around federal government interfering with the way people do things. Um, and it's also this. Dang, I had something else I was going to say, but it has escaped my mind about uh, these things about nationalized. Oh, I remember what it was. There's been these complaints about artificial voter rolls. And people who shouldn't be voting from the right for a long time. And a lot of the times when they provide these like fake, people who should not be allowed to vote, oftentimes it's things like, two people who had the same name, um, or yeah, basically things that were actually the person should have been allowed to vote. Um, two people born on the same day with the same name. In a whole state, it's the chances aren't low. If you have a common name, then they would be born on the same day. It happens. Um, and I think especially with the sort of, this doesn't seem related on its face, but especially with the ruling from the Supreme Court about that ICE can detain people just for being basically not white or not seeming American enough. They could easily use that same thing of like, well, we'll just throw out all your voter rolls, and then if you want them back, then you have to reapply and get confirmed. But by that time, they've already messed up a whole election. So with something that is not a provable issue, it's absurd that they would go to these levels. And then as far as the SCOTUS ruling, it's interesting because the reason you mentioned with the mail-in ballots, a lot of people are foreign nationals or not foreign nationals, I guess, but they don't live here and they still vote. Maybe they're on sabbatical in another country or working in another country. They're in the military. Going to school internationally. Whatever. There's lots of reasons why people aren't here, and so they mail in their ballots, and to all this idea about all the complaints about it just kind of don't hold water. I mean, the reason that our elections are on Tuesdays in America is because they wanted to have space for people to go to church on Sunday, and then if they lived a day's ride away from their polling place, that they could have time to go there. And then hopefully be back by time they had to sell at the market, which I guess was on Wednesdays. Um, Go me and remembering my ninth grade civics class. But I mean, even that was this idea of we're going to change the whole system because people might not have easy access to their polling station. And so, mail in ballots are definitely of that same tradition. And then I also think that, you had said that it would be rare for them to come back in August. I would hope the fact that, a lot of the Supreme Courts, even the justices, including some of the conservative ones who said, like, we're losing the kind of reputation of being nonpartisan, which is very accurate. I think it would really hurt that image of maintaining partisanship if they came back into session for this specific thing. Uh, yeah.
It would certainly, absolutely, they'd certainly take a hit on the reputation, and it's not like they haven't had enough of that.
Right.
But let's see if they do it, because it still could. The
Right.
Roberts Court is not, every once in a while the Roberts Court cares about its reputation, but every once in a while it doesn't. So we'll have to see what actually happens and what they choose to do. Although it is just an excellent point that you mentioned, both in voting and in immigration issues, the initial fear that the conservatives always use is that they're just concerned about people doing things illegally, or people who are not citizens doing something illegal, and that oh, to pay a, like with the immigrants issue, ICE has not just been shooting immigrants. It has done that, but it is also shooting U.S. citizens unarmed and in the streets. So it always winds up becoming a larger thing. Now, you also mentioned Rand Paul, which is interesting because you're right. We haven't heard about him. We've had some blessed relief, but yet that has changed this week because he's wound up popping up all over the place, trying to attack Fauci. For Paul claims that Fauci was giving out misinformation when it was actually just the information he was providing early on when things were still being worked out. And what was the other thing? Oh yeah, Rand Paul. He also popped up because the governor of Kentucky called on his fellow senator Mitch McConnell to show himself, saying that the people of Kentucky deserve to know that what's going on with their uh, chosen representatives. And for some reason, Rand Paul popped up and started attacking the governor of Kentucky, saying that it wasn't his place to do it, or he should, there's no other libertarian to be. So we'll see if Mitch actually, makes some sort of video appearance sometime soon, or shows up somewhere soon, and not just the one picture that looks like he's been taxidermied into a sitting position. There's one other issue we want to cover for Election Central, which is what's going on in Peru, which has just elected as president Keiko Fujimori, who is the daughter and former first lady of the former president Alberto Fujimori. And what else can you tell us about that?
Well, if you have a question about how she was the first lady, as both of us did, um, apparently her mother and father got divorced while he was in office. And so he was like, well, I don't want you in my cabinet anymore. And I guess apparently it's really important to have a first lady. So she was, I think elected. I think he has four kids. I think he might have another daughter, but I'm assuming she was, maybe you have to be over 18. I don't know. But yes. Fujimori, both her and her father, but her father started, he's the namesake of this political movement called Fujimorism in Peru that is feels pretty fascist, if not fascist adjacent. They're hard right. They are both culturally and socially. They believe in authoritarianism. They're anti-communism. They're economically neoliberal. Um, and yeah, they just sort of don't believe in education of queer rights, gender rights. I'm sure anything else that's you know conservative, and it is concerning. So she'd run for her father was president for a while, and she had run for president a few times herself unsuccessfully. And then after her father ran again, he ended up passing away in 2024, and so she took over sort of on his momentum and was able to this time get through into being elected. So it's concerning. Um, so we'll see how it goes. The way we'll see how it goes with young Bolsonaro.
Exactly. Yeah, the legacy candidates, or sort of that following up on a monarchistic form of going with the next one in line. Yeah, we'll see how it's up for us that we call "Will All Beef Hooked?" And we've got a number of issues here, economically speaking. First off, Brent crude recently hit $100 a barrel, and that is after some incidents in the Middle East. The Houthi rebels, who are allies of Iran, decided to start attacking ships carrying oil in the Red Sea. Now, while everything's been happening over in the Straits of Hormuz, the other side of Saudi Arabia basically is that little passage that allows for transportation into the Mediterranean Sea. Is a shortcut that was made, I guess it was in the 50s. And there hasn't been much action over there, but now there is. So some Iranian backed rebels attacked a bunch of ships in the Red Sea over at Bab el Mandeb, which I believe we mentioned in a previous episode as being a potential for being a hotspot. And here we are. So barrels are hitting $100, and it will only go up, I think, at least in the short term. We'll have to deal with it going a little bit higher, but even if it goes down by a couple of bucks, that's still $90, $100 a barrel. That's going to start costing.
Yeah, and we've already been. The other thing that's worth noting is that we've already kind of uh, we've been doing this a while with gas being expensive, and so we don't have a lot of easily acquirable, cheaper alternatives, or would have jumped on them by now.
Too true. Another issue is the European Commission fined Google $1 billion upon finding that they did some harm to competitors in the search engines. They sort of rigged them so that they weren't helping the competitors, or not giving them a fair playing field. And so Europe actually did something about it, which is remarkable. Yeah, exactly. Good for the European Commission. And maybe, hopefully, Google will pick up on the idea that they need to where they're getting away with all sorts of things still, I assume, allegedly. Also, anything on Google before we?
The only other thing to add is that $1 billion is unfortunately a drop in the bucket to them.
That is true. That is true. That's we should look that up, but it's probably something like one of these things where it turns out to be a week's profit or something like that. Um, fair point. The president's been trying to reduce our reliance on Chinese minerals, and after initially setting goals to be off of them by the start of next year and doubling down on that commitment in May, he's just signed another bill reducing exceptions. However, local protections not kept pace with the needs, and some of these, including rare earth magnets, are considered critical for certain scientific projects and certain research that provides other benefits. Anything about this?
Yeah, so I mean, it's in theory, or at least in the stated goal, it's not too dissimilar from tariffs. The whole idea is to have things be done locally, right? We'll mine our own rare earth minerals, but that's not the kind of rare earth mining operation. Isn't something you can just spin up overnight. Um, and these are things that we need to I guess they would say be competitive, in like research and technology and things like that. And we can have another argument, or we can have another debate another day about, the toxicity of doing things like this, and the sort of strip mining for resources, the same that we could with the oil segment. But it's worth noting that this is not something that you can just bravado your way out of. There's these systems are set up, and sort of by nature of capitalism, if you're like a strong capitalist believer, you would believe that these are the systems that are the most efficient systems you can build, right? The whole idea of capitalism is efficiency overall, profit overall. And so, while, like I said, we can talk about the harm of mining these rare earth minerals, and the, like, I would say in broad sense, the good of bringing things to America and paying Americans to do certain tasks. You cannot do both at the same time, and you cannot retool from one to the other one overnight, no matter what you think. So
Right. Well, someone's just thinking of how much money they can get out of it. And it's not, this is not something that is an isolated issue. We talked about it was either last week or the week before, we talked about CAS Resources, the company that has followed up on the Soviets' ideas. The Soviets dug some tunnels to go after tungsten, which at the time was it was a mineral. Now it's even more precious because it's used in a lot of applications for electronics and computers and all of this that have become refined over those couple of decades. But what happened was the Soviets dug a bunch. He said, "Well, let's that's perfect. We'll go in and make a deal, and we'll get into the mines, and then we can just get the tungsten without having to worry about digging." And lo and behold, a couple of Trump's sons are involved with the company that's starting to look into this, and that they're making deals for. And America wound up providing hundreds of billions of dollars to the companies based on, you know, in the future something will happen. So we're going to fund them now. And this is just like the snafu with Iran, where he said, well, part of the big deal that he made was that he would give money to them for stopping the war. And then when it looked like they weren't going to stop, he started trying to get them the payments early. So he's going to pay them for not stopping the war. It's always something to do with money, and somehow his winding up with a cut. That is what happened. So I assume that's part of this deal as well, as they look into it. Okay, we are going to. It's like we're going to head towards wrapping up here this week, and we are going to do that with an Epstein update. And that is because you may recall Katie Feng, a former reporter, has sued the Department of Justice for the unredacted Epstein files. And now they said in court, well, she should have just made a FOIA request, information request by, filing a FOIA request. But it is also true that there's certain aspects that can be retained by the Department of Justice if it's a FOIA act and not if they are legally required to provide them, which they were by the Transparency Act that we talked about earlier in the show. Transparency Act that was passed by Congress, signed by whoever the president is, and it's so she did the smart thing by suing them. She's getting them to do more than what they want to do and release unredacted files. And what's happened is that this is back in the news because the judge has made a ruling saying that he wants to see some of these files, and he wants to see and he specified 10 documents that he wants to see. He wants to see the unredacted versions, and he wants to see the DOJ's statement as to why they are redacting any part of the document that is redacted. Now, legally, they're supposed to just redact something like it's been the president's name or some people, some specific individuals who are not victims, that they are redacting their names and information about particularly wealthy people who are in the file. So the judge is saying you now have until July 30th to produce these 10 documents, the unredacted versions, and your statement, if there's any redaction in it, as to justifying why you're redacting them. So we will be very interesting to see what happens with that. Certainly something that we all want to know more about. Let's see what else is going on. Anything else about the Epstein update?
While you look, let me just offer my 2 cents on what you said so far. Yeah, so I don't know if you said it specifically. Sorry, I've been having some audio issues today, but it has to be released by July 30th, which is tomorrow. And this, this idea of like the Department of Justice saying, why not just have a FOIA request? And I think it relates to something we said at the very top of this thing, when we did our Epstein update then, is that the government has made it their personal mission to slow walk this as much as possible. Basically to say, look at all the things we have done, whenever anybody complains about all the things they haven't done. And to note, it's not that difficult to have released this all unredacted, or released it unredacted to a third party to do the redactions, or to some big newspapers, even though a lot of those are being bought by Trump and his folk anyway. But people who've done, for example, the Edward Snowden list was given to journalists to choose what to redact. But that would at least get it out to the eyes of ideally people who aren't protecting themselves. They are theoretically, ostensibly beholden to the people, not to the government. And so, and the government famously slow walks or partially fulfills FOIA requests as it is. They're not foolproof by any means. They're not, always going to get everything you want. Sometimes there's been examples, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know there's been several examples of people who put in a FOIA request and then were given more than they were supposed to be given, and that's how we got information. People messed up. And so this is just a huge example of all this being slow walked.
There you go. Yeah, and all I'll add is that you also mentioned about when they were supposed to be released, and of course there was also a deadline. Was it 60 days for the that was in the Transparency Act that was passed by Congress and signed by a certain president? So there's all sorts of deadlines that have been blown through, and so here we are, and we'll see what happens. It'll be very interesting to tune in tomorrow and hear what happens. We'll perhaps DOJ will surprise us all, and perhaps not.
Oh, I wanted to. There is something else I wanted to add. There was some school um, that with being two people who attended a prestigious, this is from the AP, Michigan Fine Arts School, I saw this today, uh, reported conduct of a sexual nature by Jeffrey Epstein. So these two people who are attending this Michigan Fine Arts School said that Epstein, who is a major donor, um, had, you know, had conduct of a sexual nature. And in there looking into it, they found out that there was allegations against 50 other people at the school spanning decades. Um, there had been like lots and lots of like, hiding of things. And so it's like, first of all, it's an example of why we have to be open about these things, because sort of like a cockroach in a restaurant or something, if you see one, there's thousands. Sorry if any of you are eating out soon. It's probably fine. It's probably fine. But in this case, it's not. This is something we should absolutely look into, because it's almost certainly deeper than we realize.
Too true. Too true. I agree with you. And that's our last word for this week. Thanks for joining us for PolitiPod Live for Political Talk. You're welcome to join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here for PolitiPod Live. If you want political laughs, join us and a half dozen of our friends for our monthly political comedy podcast, PolitiPod. You'll find that at soundcloud.com/PolitiPod.
This is Hannah Soldner.
And I'm Matt Nisanoff saying goodbye.
Bye.